All right, thank you so much, Chief. We love you too. How about that? Okay. All right, so I think we're now going to move into the Q&A portion of this bit. So if we want to pull up some of the questions that I've already seen come through Slido, that would be great. Do we have them? I can actually redo some of those. All right, so one of the, so you can actually vote for questions that you like. So don't you hate going to your presentations afterwards? You're like, why did someone ask that stupid question? No stupid questions here. We're only going to take the ones that are voted well. So let's go with the first one that I see here. This has been voted up 4 times already. So it's from one of our anonymous submitter. I'm a visible minority woman. Are we listening to and addressing the fears and misconceptions of those who discriminate and who are anti-immigration? Simply telling them that racism is wrong is not working. So I'm going to open up the question to the 3 of you, Dr. Parhar, Dr. Krell, and Chief Joseph. What do you think of that question? Dr. Krell, do you want to tackle that? Are we listening to and addressing the fears and misconceptions of those who discriminate and who are anti-immigration? Simply telling them that racism is wrong and is not working. Because in the media, I mean, certainly in the work that we've done, we've labeled it as racism, we've called it out, but it doesn't seem that it's changing the dialogue much. So would one of you like to tackle that, Dr. Krell?
That's a very complicated question. I think that one of the problems of addressing the issue of racism is that the education component so often seems to be missing. One of the peculiar features, I think, of new governments coming in is that they ignore what was done with the past, because one of the realities of governments in a democracy is that it's a successionary system, and one of the way of building oneself up, in a manner of speaking, is to disparage the efforts of the last. And I think that is such a wrong model of trying to gradually inform your populations by being negative about the last. So, for example, in recent days, I've read some, I think, pretty respectable journalists, even they are now under attack in many places, pretty respectable journalists who have pointed out that during the conservative term, Jason Kennedy, Minister of Immigration, did a credible job of bringing immigrants into the country and refugees. One would think, with the advent of the Liberals, that they discovered it. I think that's wrong. I think we have to build on our successes, reassure our peoples over the years that we're doing a good job, no matter who the government is, because that is one of our underlying commitments, to accept refugees, to accept immigrants on a regular basis, to make them welcome, to assist them to fit in. You know, so I don't know whether that precisely answers the question, but certainly the word misconceptions have to do a great deal with what people are being told.
Right, so politicians certainly have some responsibility in that respect then.
Very much so.
Mm-hmm. All right. So let's go to the next question. How can true dialogue be possible between those who support and oppose immigration and racial harmony? This is a great question. Often I feel that despite our good intentions, I'm assuming, the dialogue is really not happening. How can true dialogue be possible? I think all 3 of you alluded to that in your presentations about reaching across the aisle in some sense and actually trying to open up that conversation. But how do we practically do that when you think about someone who is so politically the opposite of who you are? Is that possible? Chief, would you like to start with that? And then Dr. Parhar, you're nodding, you may have some ideas as well.
I got the answer, no.
Great.
Thank you. That's really a good question. In my own experience and the experience of Reconciliation Canada, bringing people together of all faiths and cultures, creating dialogue at a deeper level, and hopefully transforming relationships. It actually can happen. What we need to do is to set a safe space for everybody to have a dialogue, create sacred space. That's what we do, we claim to do. And so that when everybody who comes into the circle, this dialogue, recognizes that the first rule is that everybody has a right to be a part of that dialogue, oppose or not oppose. And that everybody has a right to speak their positions without interruption. And then one of the things, when the magic starts to happen, in spite of that contradiction of ideas and emotions, the magic comes when through this dialogue we begin to recognize our common humanity. It happens. There's one thing that you can't strip from us, is our common humanity. People on all sides of the political spectrum and the religious spectrum try to create these silos or divisions, but they can't strip from us our common humanity. And it's in this time when we create that kind of space and that dynamic that we begin to break through the old stereotypes, the old attitudes, the old wrongful assumptions. And we begin to hear each other, and soon, little by little, we begin to recognize that maybe listening to each other is an important step, and then looking at a resolution after that, after we've had some sustained dialogue. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's very possible. And I hope that for the women here who feel the way the question is posed, that you stay the course. Believe in yourself and believe in others. And one of the things I know that'll be really important for all of the women in here who may feel discriminated and not heard is that you've got two things. You've got to love yourself and begin to re-empower yourself by many means.
All right, great. Thank you, Chief Joseph. So we all bleed the same red blood, and Dr. Parhar, you've seen it, so you know. What were your thoughts on that?
Those are very wise words from Chief Joseph, and it really is about creating that dialogue, and it's about creating that right space. One of the challenges right now is that we create the wrong space and we create the wrong dialogue. I mean, one of the frustrating things that happens now is it could be the most eloquent story, it could be the most eloquent piece of art, poetry, picture, and what happens on the internet, right? Or you have people calling them trolls and even naming them things that start this sort of anonymous negative hatred words, some sort of cyberbullying type stuff going on. And it's a lack of accountability. It's lack of accountability. What Chief Joseph said is, being able to sit in a room, I need to be responsible for the words that are come out of my mouth. And you need to hear why your words may be hurting me. So what goes on the internet and other disconnected ways, even emails sometimes, is actually the wrong way to do this. And I think it's perpetuating a lot of it's perpetuating some of that misunderstanding. When we look at the example in the world right now, and somewhere, whether it's election results, and yes, I think what happens south of the border is way more complex than just looking at a race issue. So if you were to sit down with an individual who voted one way or another way, and it often isn't race. It often is that they're upset about something else that's gone on in their lives. It's their economic state, it's the health system, it's something else, and they felt disillusioned, disenfranchised, isolated. And what's coming out is this piece, and helping them to understand that. I mean, I actually don't believe people are evil to the core. I think there are some misunderstandings, and you said education, and I think education is the key. But meaningful dialogue, I think in order for us to go further, that's what needs to happen. And in fact, because we're not doing good dialogue is what's brought us to this.
Right, Dr. Parhar, so often there's fears, insecurities that lead to what manifests as sometimes racism. So I'm now going to also take that last question there from for Dr. Krell, because that question about newcomers and integrating communities, I think, is actually the perfect question for our fireside chat with our four additional speakers later this afternoon. So I'm going to save that goodie for later, but right now, while we have Dr. Krell, I'm going to ask him this one. You mentioned during your presentation on why two dominant languages, for example, just Chinese and English, could potentially be an isolating thing. Could you expand on that?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I wasn't raising it because I thought I had an answer. I was raising it because the question cannot be posed, apparently. Because there are a number of things that concern people these days, and when they ask the question, is it perhaps a problem in our community? The response is, you're a racist, and the dialogue is over. We have many, many questions floating around. I raised perhaps 3. There are hundreds, perhaps thousands of questions that require dialogue and intelligent discussion and learning and information and research. But the response to one's question, is it perhaps a problem? And then you put the words English and Chinese together and you have an uprising. It's a racist question. Could be English and other languages too in various segments of our communities. And then the discussion has something to do with, to what degree can a person integrate themselves into a society. I told you my experience as an immigrant, but it's already so many generations ago. But we no longer spoke English at home, Dutch at home, I'm sorry. In order to force ourselves to learn English, we dropped our native language, right? I don't think that's a wise thing to do, because Dutchmen should know where they come from. I mentioned that too, know where you come from. Retain your language skills, keep your culture. Talk with your family, especially if you're an immigrant and you have family elsewhere. You want your children to be able to speak to grandparents and aunts and uncles that are somewhere else. But what are the factors that allow you to integrate into your local community if too much of that remains with you? So that's just one of so many questions. What concerns me is the fact that these questions are being shut down with easy, glib responses. When you raise them, well, you must be racist. Well, no one wants to be called a racist, so the dialogue is over. May I add one other very important thing about questions? Questions are the most important manner in which you can initiate dialogue. And there was a wonderful man, it's a legend, a story, Rabbi Nachman from Wrocław, way back when, a Jewish sage. And he said, it is most important to raise questions, perhaps the ones that have no answers. He says, and then accidentally, perhaps 50 years later, someone else will pose a question, which is an answer to the first.
Perhaps Chief Joseph might have the answer this time, do you?
Thank you. I wanted to read out a couple of metrics here that are probably important to think about. And I read them in one of the news articles I was looking at. In that article, it said that, and I use the word whites really respectfully, whites will be a visible minority in Metro Vancouver in less than 2 decades. By 2031, whites will make up only 2 out of 5 residents. So the demographic is changing really, really quickly. And I think it's going to become more complicated. I know when I was young and I wanted to hate everybody, they were the white people. But now you've got all of you here, and I can't hate all of you, right? And so I'm beginning to recognize that the best way forward is not to hate anybody. But with respect to newcomers, I understand how much pressure there must be. If you come to a foreign country, you don't know the language, you don't know the traditions or the cultures. So there's going to be an obvious reluctance simply to be out there and to integrate. But one of conversely though, I want to suggest this, that if you're an immigrant from a country far away and you come from that place, they've always had a worldview that determined who you were, wherever you came from. They always had traditions, they had protocol, they had song, they had dance, and with all of that, those were instruments that gave them a sense of who they were. It provided them with a sense of dignity and esteem, because that's who they were. I think one of the things that we've got to be very careful about is not to ask immigrants to assimilate. That's what they tried with Aboriginal people, and look at the horrible situation that we've come to. So don't think in terms of assimilating. Stand on those values that you were brought up to. And over time, other Canadians who want you to be part of this country along with them will recognize that you're enriching the fabric of this country with all of those things you bring. Not only your productivity, not only your smarts, but who you are spiritually as well. And I keep thinking about all the faces and all the ethnicities, all the difference. We have so much to embrace and to celebrate, and we got to keep that up here as a reminder that we can do that now. In spite of what's going on around the world, we can do that here in our country.
All right, fantastic.